aircraft as tiny as a pinhead won't fly, yet a fruit fly does. This butterfly knows another trick. It creates colors without pigments. 2 flying examples for science.
Airplanes are designed in a way to function very safely. So they has to fly from A to B, and they should be safe. I mean, an insect is a total different thing. I mean, nature never intended to make an insect very safe. So they have to fly. They're fighting into these in air combats against each other, and therefore it's so fascinating because there are other constraints on this flight machine than on airplanes. Engineers think when you understand the biology of these insects and you copy that into a technical machine, that you somehow can mimic or somehow can get these incredible performance for their artificial insect. What you see here is a flapping robotic wing. So we are interested in the aerodynamic performance of insect wings, and this robotic wing is our tool to study insect aerodynamics. So instead of watching all the flow around real insect wings, we can just use this electromechanical model.
It's long been understood how an aircraft stays airborne, but how he manages it is a lot less clear.
That was a mystery or the puzzle for a very long time, that if you apply airplane theory to insect flight, the outcome is there's not enough flight force produced to keep the animal in the air. The wings are so tiny, so the force that the flight has available to push the air to a certain direction is so much smaller than the force we have available. So we can easily just move our limbs through the air because we are so powerful. But the tiny fly has not enough force to move the wings very easily through the air. So that flies feel the air like a fluid.
The same forces operate on a large wing in oil as they do on a small wing in air. Air bubbles showed for the first time the incredible spinning vortices that hold a fly in the air.
So the wing is flapping back and forth, and you can see that at the edge, so the upper edge of the wing that leads the motion, there's a fluid volume spinning around. And this spinning around volume of fluid can very effectively enhance the forces. This is one of the secrets, and with that force, many insects can easily fly.
It's one of our first wing drives that was actually actuated, so there were motors in here which would drive the wing back and forth. And you can see this is huge compared to my hands. This is about 5 times the size of what we would finally want. But it gave us a first chance to practice getting things moving at a very high speed and what would be involved in getting joints to last so that the joints don't wear out.
Does it still work?
No, this has been worn out through use. All of these prototypes have been driven to the point where they stop working, and then we have to start building the next one.
At the University of Berkeley in California, work on the robot fly has been going on for years. This is one of the first wing prototypes, though it still doesn't move exactly like a fly's wing.
So remember that the wing needs to not just flap, but be able to change its angle as it's going back and forth. And so the idea our group has come up with is that there are two pieces to this mechanism for each wing. So there's two pieces to the mechanism for each wing. If the two components move together, you get a flapping like that. If the two linkages move opposite, you get a rotation. And so by coordinating the rotation and the flapping at the same time, we can get the motion like the real fly wing. So that's been the most difficult challenge, has been to come up with a mechanism which will let us drive the wing 150 times a second. So it really gives us a very high appreciation for the mechanism in real flies, that such a compact mechanism, so lightweight, can drive the wing with such a large motion and so fast. First fly we had that could actually move itself around was this device. This is the first one where we built a small portable device where the wing could actually move in the correct way. And this we attached to something called a flight mill. When the wing turns on, it generates lift and thrust and can move the fly around on a post.
If you want to make what we call micro air vehicles, you have to give this micro air vehicle, of course, some sensory feedback. So you need eyes, you need some sort of stabilization routines and sensory feedback in general to keep this model stable in the air. We developed this flight simulator for flies in order to study the behavior and the function of insects. And it's more or less like a small TV for flies. So one thing of the flight arena is to make the fly think it's going to the left or it's going to the right or it's going up or down. Because in response to this visual stimulation, the fly is changing its behavior. It responds to the visual stimuli and changing wing motion and forces. And we do that just by moving visual pattern, for example, up and down. So when the pattern moves up, the fly thinks, oh, I'm falling, okay, because the environment goes up. So it tries to make a lot of flight force to keep track on the upgoing motion of the pattern. And vice versa. I mean, when it goes down, the fly thinks, oh, I'm going up. You get a measure of the working range of the flight motor and can judge, okay, which kind of combinations of stroke amplitude, for example, and the frequency with which the wings beat the fly is using during flight.
So this is our latest prototype. So this whole device, including the actuators, including the motors, weighs a little over 1/10 of a gram. It's got about the same weight as a real fly, but its wingspan is maybe 50% bigger. Our first challenge, which is going to take us about 5 years, is to get the mechanism working the right way so that the wings move fast enough so it generates enough lift to take off. But we could see taking another few years to get it to the point where it'll be flying, hovering, turning corners, etc.
So in a few years we can expect to see aircraft as small as flies. For spying, of course, but there are also other applications.
There's the other scenarios where, in a case of a disaster, a fire or something like that, that you want something you can send in, and sending in one big expensive robot may not be the best thing because the robot may get lost. So instead, if you could send in 100 or 1,000 disposable robots, and if they find a person, it'll be worth it. It's okay if you lose all the robots.
The blue morpho butterfly is so iridescently blue that a group of them can even be seen from an aeroplane. Even so, their wings are totally devoid of blue pigment.
The butterflies in this showcase are really quite special to us. Visually, they're stunning. The blue ones, well, they're all morpho butterflies indigenous to South and Central America, but the blue ones really do stand out because of their intense blue color. Now, we might think, you might think, I used to think, they had strong blue pigment in their wings. In actual fact, they don't. The material of which they're made is pretty transparent. So what causes the color then? Well, there are tiny multi-layer structures on the wings of each of these 4 butterflies on their scales that manipulates light. It controls the way it lands, the way it reflects, the way it's transmitted in a pretty astonishing way. The technique, the phenomenon that they use is called interference. The wing of the butterfly, the scales of the butterfly, actually have series of multilayers of this material called cuticle, which is pretty similar to our fingernail. Light hits the top multilayer, and we have to remember that light is a wave. Now, from the top interface, we get a little bit of reflection. Not a lot, about 5%. The rest of that light is transmitted until it gets to the next interface. Remember, these are pretty much colorless. And that second interface will reflect some back, another 5% back. So without even considering the remaining waves, the remaining interfaces down there, which all play a part, if we just consider the top 2, we see that there's a wave going in that direction there, and there's also a wave going in this direction here. And there's our eye. The peak of that wave overlaps in space exactly the peak of that wave. And if they add in the right way, that a peak adds to a peak, you get a super peak and a very bright signal. If a peak adds to a trough, then they cancel each other out, as they do for every other color except blue. Were nature to design a slightly thicker layer, then instead of blue being reflected preferentially, we'd see green reflected preferentially. And indeed, some other butterflies do reflect green rather than blue. This one is a papilio butterfly. To our eyes, and certainly to the eyes of all the predators of this butterfly, it looks green. In actual fact, The multi-layer structure that is incorporated into the scales of this butterfly is much more complicated even than the morpho butterfly. It's the next step on complexity-wise. Instead of reflecting green as we appear to see is reflected, each scale reflects very tiny juxtaposed small regions of blue and of yellow using the same multi-layer structure. That's amazing optically. Our eye adds those two colors together and gives us the stimulus. It creates the stimulus of green. This butterfly can happily sit with its wings open on foliage, on leaves, on forest canopy, and it will not disappear necessarily, but it will be much, much less visible than if it was a morpho butterfly or if it was something else. And yet at the same time, due to one of the intricacies associated with the eyes of this butterfly and of its mate, a mate or a competing male will see this butterfly as blue, whereas we and the predators see it as green.
A couple of tricks we've learned from butterflies. A color that does not involve pigment, but the manipulation of light in transparent layers, is known as a structural color. One of the characteristics of structural colors is that they're not as strong from every angle. For instance, the colors on the wings of this butterfly seem to turn on and off depending on the light's angle of incidence. This butterfly looks the same color from all directions, yet that makes it from an optical viewpoint superior to every other butterfly.
I took one of these across to the electron microscope, had a look in the microscope, and as I zoomed in, I could see that, well, there were the scales there, as with every other butterfly. But when I got right into the edge of a damaged scale, underneath the ridges, the mechanical structure on top, I could see that there was more than just one periodicity, more than one regularity. There were three. It was a three-dimensional structure. Not just a one-dimensional multilayer, but three. And that's something that we call a crystal. And if it manipulates the way light travels through it, then we call it a photonic crystal, because a single particle, if you like, of light is a photon. Photonic crystals are something that technology, optical technology, is very interested in right now. Many groups around the world are expending huge effort to try to reproduce three-dimensional photonic crystals, crystals that manipulate the way that light reflects from them and flows through them.
A perfect synthetic photonic crystal would open the way to new technologies for telecommunication. For instance, scientists dream of one single optical chip that's capable of processing telephone conversations of everyone in the world simultaneously. The University of Twente is at the forefront when it comes to the development of photonic crystals.
Wat ik nu aan het bekijken ben, zijn zeg maar de mallen voor de kristallen die we uiteindelijk gaan maken. Zo'n mal bestaat uit kleine bolletjes die heel mooi gerangschikt zijn in een driedimensionaal rooster. Op de plaats waar de bolletjes zitten gaan we lucht creëren en op de plaats waar lucht zit willen we vast materiaal aanbrengen. Dan proberen we eigenlijk we noemen dat zelf een luchtbolkristal te maken. Dus een kristal wat voor meer dan 90% uit lucht bestaat en maar voor 10% uit vast materiaal. En deze kristallen hebben een hele sterke wisselwerking met licht. En dan kunnen we heel veel trucjes uithalen met licht.
Worldwide, scientists are searching for the perfect photonic crystal. The crystal is basically a cage in which to catch light. It's not difficult to block light. It can be done by using a black cloth. The cloth absorbs the light and the light disappears. On the other hand, a mirror reflects light. The real trick is to capture light and save it until such a time as we choose to release it again. Light must be tamed.
Het volgende veld schetsen. De bedoeling is om uiteindelijk een kristal te maken. Even een ideale als doos weergegeven kristal, waarbij je hoe je erop afkomt met licht van diezelfde kleur, in dezelfde golflengte. Dit wordt iedere keer gereflecteerd. Dit gaat die kant op, dit gaat weer die kant op, dit gaat die kant op. Dus dit betekent dat hoe je ook je best doet, binnenin is het hartstikke donker voor die golflengte van dit licht wat je hierop afstuurt.
Terwijl de stof op zich doorzichtig is.
Ja. Want dit bestaat dus bijvoorbeeld uit kleine bolletjes, of zoals bij die vlinder, kleine holtes met daartussenin een vaste stof. En die stoffen op zich, lucht natuurlijk, maar ook die vaste stoffen zijn op zich helemaal transparant voor die golven die je erop afstuurt. Maar nou juist doordat je ze zo hebt vormgegeven door bijvoorbeeld kleine gaatjes te maken of bolletjes te stapelen en door die afstanden juist te kiezen, namelijk zodat ze overeenkomen met die golflengte die je erop afstuurt, daardoor sluit je het licht buiten uiteindelijk. Dus daarmee heb je een soort perfecte driedimensionale spiegel gemaakt. Wat reuze interessant is, maar op zich niet het einddoel. Het einddoel is nou juist om het licht hier binnenin op te sluiten. Dus wat je dan moet doen is binnenin een lichtbron. Dus hier even een lampje. Even deze gloeilamp die nu als ideaal cartoon van een lamp. En als je dit lampje probeert aan te doen in zo'n fotonisch kristal, dus je stuurt er stroom doorheen, van buitenaf plus en min, dan zal dat lampje niet aan kunnen gaan. Dus die stroom die kan wel lopen, maar het lampje gaat niet aan, omdat dat licht binnenin door interferentie zich niet kan bestaan. En door nu binnenin bijvoorbeeld één bolletje weg te halen, dus dit zijn de bolletjes die er wel zijn, één bolletje haal je weg, hierdoor verstoor je in het midden bij dat lampje het kristal en daardoor kan het lampje net wel licht gaan uitzenden. Alleen dat licht kan alleen maar hier in de buurt heen en weer razen van dit defect hier. En dus op dat moment heb je dus hier binnenin, laten we zeggen in een kleine afstand van deze verstoring, heb je dus het licht opgesloten. Heb je één foton, één lichtdeeltje, heb je echt opgesloten.
Revolutionary. That's how it sounds, and it is. Despite the fact that only a few people understand how it works, this piece of crystal, just half a centimeter in size, could herald a new technological era. And the butterfly is perfectly oblivious.
De vlinder die is de inspiratiebron voor het soort structuren die je nodig hebt. Want uiteindelijk, al het spel wat je hier speelt, alle mooie verheven gedachten dat we ooit kunnen verwezenlijken om licht te manipuleren en op te sluiten, hangt nog steeds helemaal ervan af dat we zo'n structuur kunnen maken die in alle 3 dimensies, hoogte, breedte, diepte, netjes, regelmatig is geordend. En de vlinder, die kon het al lang.
Current optical technology is trying to, well, not so much replicate this structure, but produce a very similar type of structure. It wants to be in charge of what light does in a system. This butterfly has achieved that several million years ago.